All-electric homes aren't just clean and healthy, they save energy and money too. Lucky you, the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, or DCSEU, makes home electrification easier and more affordable than ever. Affordable as in district residents can get up to $15,000 off upgrades. Income qualified folks, no cost. Get rebates for heat pumps that warm and cool efficiently. Induction stoves that boil water faster than Donna Summer can say, well, hot stuff. But funding will not last, so visit dcseu.com/electric and bust a move on energy-efficient electrification for your home.
Sometimes the most meaningful gifts or decorations aren't just regular old family pictures. I'm talking about your treasured high school football jersey, a ticket from your first concert, or a flyer for a loved one's art show. These are your most sentimental possessions, and they can be protected and immortalized by the perfect frame. You know, I just got an old passport of my dad's framed. He died a couple years ago, and I don't know why. This really spoke to me. Luckily, FrameBridge makes it easy and affordable to custom frame just about anything. Just pick the perfect frame for your piece from their curated selection of styles, and their design experts will do the rest. And they'll ship it right to your doorstep for free on orders over $100. Best of all is FrameBridge's happiness guarantee. If you're not 100% happy with your piece for any reason, they'll make it right. Visit framebridge.com or one of 8 local FrameBridge stores at 14th Street, Union Market, Georgetown, Bethesda, Old Town, Clarendon, McLean, or the Mosaic District, and start framing.
Williams to pass, lobs it up. He's got Clark at the goal line. He's got it. Touchdown, Washington Redskins.
Today on CityCast DC, the standoff over moving the Commanders back to RFK is easing up. News broke yesterday that the DC Council chairman reached an agreement with the Commanders to adjust the final terms of the stadium deal. This opens the door for the council to vote on a deal in a matter of days after the public comment period next Tuesday and Wednesday. There's also been a lot of noise about the pressure President Trump is putting on Mayor Bowser and others to change the name back to Redskins. All the back and forthing over coming back to a stadium spot where the team had its great glory days might make you wonder, why do folks romanticize the Redskins' heyday so much?
Hand off to Smith, and he's back. Good hole. Midfield.
What were those old glory days of the culture around the team that everyone over 50 talks about?
15, 10, 5, touchdown, Washington Redskins.
And is it even possible to get them back? I sat down with columnist Kevin Blackistone, a fan from way back, to dig into it. Today is Thursday, July 24th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Kevin.
How you doing?
I'm good. So listen, you and me are both DC guys, but for anyone under around 40 who's here in DC, their only experience with the heyday of our football team is when the current leadership of that football team decides to like throw some nostalgia-themed marketing, which is like always, and including this year with a new throwback jersey.
Right.
But I want to actually talk about that heyday for the uninitiated. You've been a fan a long time. Was there one particular game or moment that stands out to you as like the epitome of the old team?
Oh, sure. December 31st, 1972. The greatest New Year's Eve ever and my favorite sports moment ever. That was the heyday of the Dallas-Washington rivalry.
A mild, unseasonable rain could not cloud the glory of the moments preceding the Washington Redskins showdown with the ruling world champion Dallas Cowboys.
Dallas came to town to be hosted by Washington in the NFC championship game, which meant the winner would go on to the Super Bowl. It was a late afternoon game, and it was just the most raucous sports environment in this city for a team that I remember. The final score was 26-3. Washington won and went on to their first ever Super Bowl, and they absolutely mauled the Cowboys.
The clock now is running. The count is on. The fans are already starting onto the field. 7 seconds remain, but they'll never play them, believe me. And the field is a swarm of humanity here.
Wait, will you explain? I remember growing up, too. I'm a little younger than you, but like the Dallas week was a huge week, the week ahead of the game. Everyone get pumped.
Yeah, it was huge.
Why did Dallas come to be the enemy, though? I mean, it's not close to here. There's no sort of traditional like New York and Philadelphia kind of thing.
Well, unfortunately, it plays on the old trope of cowboys and Indians, and that's when Washington had the appropriate nickname of Redskins. But the Washington-Dallas rivalry goes back to the introduction of Dallas into the NFL. Somehow, some way, the Cowboys got ownership of the fight song for the Washington team, which has the famous refrain, "Hail for old DC," which back in the day was "Hail for old Dixie," just to let you know how Southern the team was and the kind of market that they were aiming at. So at any rate, a negotiation broke out in exchange for getting the ownership of the fight song back. George Preston Marshall, who was the owner of the Washington franchise, agreed to let the Cowboys into the NFL. And so that was his first competition for a franchise in the Southern United States. And that's kind of where it began. The other thing is that Washington was horrible during the 60s. And Dallas got very good very quickly over the 60s. And their marketing with the star on the helmet and just football being a big deal in the state of Texas really carried them through, and they had a lot of star players. And it really irked Washington fans that this upstart team from the state of Texas could rise to be one of the best in the NFL at a time when Washington hadn't been good since the 40s. And so that's really it. And I just remember growing up hating the Dallas Cowboys. And that moment for the Washington team at home in front of me, we used to sit in Section 312 of DC Stadium before it became RFK Stadium, to see them absolutely crush the Cowboys and then be able to go into the Super Bowl was just an incredibly joyous moment. I mean, I remember just about everything about it. And that was just about the time where I was, really coming of age as a sports fan.
So you got to do something I never got to do, which is actually go to see a game live. It was very, 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 very difficult to get tickets. It was sold out for years and years.
Yeah.
Talk about what it was like inside what's about to be torn down, RFK Stadium.
Sure. Well, I'm fortunate. I come from a family that's had season tickets forever. My father grew up in Leroy Park. I'm a next generation, whatever, Washingtonian, who they say we don't exist, but we do. And my father grew up going to games at Griffith Stadium, which is right near Howard University, where the hospital is now. And so when I was born, I mean, he had a fistful of season tickets. And so some people grow up with the memory of going to opening day baseball with their father. Well, for me, that's not it. The Senators were gone by 71. They weren't very good in the 60s. We didn't really go to baseball games, just here or there. But we went to see the football team in the fall and winter every Sunday that they were home. Sundays in our house were much less likely to be spent in a house of worship unless you considered that house of worship to be DC Stadium.
So like in those days, the football team was the only professional sports team here for a while. And you'd go to the stadium, which was new, but still kind of rickety. And people talked about how when people got really excited and they'd jump up and down, the stands would bounce.
Absolutely. They bounce off the field. I mean, the stadium was only 10 years old by the time of that championship football game that I mentioned to you in 72. Back then, it kind of looked futuristic. It had the metal. It was curved. It was a classic 1960s football, baseball stadium. And, I can remember Jack Kent Cooke, when he took over ownership of the team, riding on a golf cart up the ramps in the stadium to get to his box where he would watch the game. He was known as the Squire. And, he was a big-time sports team owner. He owned the Lakers, right? And it was just so cool to see him, and he would wave and greet and shake your hand. And that's what kind of made it a very homey kind of an environment. And you knew everybody who sat around you. Carl Rowan, legendary columnist for the Washington Post, sat just across the aisle, a couple seats down. And you grew up with these people. And when I mean you grew up with them, just last year, I got an email from a guy and it said, hey, I think you know my father because you grew up with him in section 312, row whatever, seat whatever, at RFK Stadium. And he's about to retire from the DOJ or something like that. And I just thought it'd be cool if we could get together and go to a football game together and have a reunion. Yeah, and of course I remembered, because we became friends. We exchanged greeting cards. I think my parents went to one of their kids' weddings at some point. So it was that kind of environment. And that never really got translated to FedEx. First of all, FedEx is just humongous. I think RFK was 56,000 or 55,000 people. And it was very close. It was very tight. Our seats were in the lower bowl, just over the entry for the team, just over their locker room. So they would come in and out the tunnel there. That was great.
For a little kid, that must have been amazing.
Oh, yeah. It was great.
All right, suffice it to say, we are in some morally ambiguous times right now, rife with hot-button issues. So it makes sense that we'd need help sorting through sticky situations and moral dilemmas. Enter philosopher and New York Times ethics columnist Kwame Anthony Appiah. He'll be at the Library of Congress on July 24th for a live event, Ask the Ethicist, hosted by the library's John W. Kluge Center. Explore real-world moral dilemmas and cast your vote on what you would do. Then hear how one of today's most influential public philosophers thinks through the same questions. Thoughtful, engaging, and full of surprising moments, this interactive program allows you to reflect on everyday ethical questions in a way that's personal, relevant, and fun. That's Ask the Ethicist this Thursday at the Library of Congress. Get free tickets at loc.gov/live.
When someone else's negligence changes your life forever, figuring out what to do next can feel overwhelming. You need lawyers who won't back down. NACE Law Group has been winning serious injury and wrongful death cases in D.C. for decades. They don't just settle, they fight for real justice. And they're not afraid to take cases to court to get it. Because when you're facing medical bills, lost wages, and unimaginable pain, good enough isn't good enough. You might remember them as Paulson and Nace. It's the same trusted lawyers, just a new name. If you need someone in your corner, reach out to NACE Law Group for a free, no-obligation consultation. Visit WashingtonDCLawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. That's 202-463-1999.
This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start that journey today? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique that quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel, just one of the 12 languages you can learn with it, including Dutch, French, Italian, which is going to be next for me, Turkish, and Russian. I love the interactive dialogues that Babbel has, which allow me to practice what I've learned right away, and also the speech recognition function, which makes sure I'm getting the pronunciation just right, which honestly, usually I'm not. Also, I love that Babbel's lessons always cover actual things that I talk about in the real world, like food, talking to people I've just met, and also food. Staying motivated to learn a new language has never been easier thanks to real-time feedback, progress trackers, and handy visualizations, in only 10 to 15 minutes a day on Babbel's mobile app or website. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So I came along a little bit later. I was actually doing the math. I might have been conceived the night of that NFC Championship game because I was born the next summer. So in the 80s, when they were actually winning Super Bowls, this was the kind of prime time of my childhood. But can you talk a little bit about how the stadium experience and the meaning of this team, then known as the Redskins, the meaning of the team to the city, sort of evolved as they got really good consistently?
Sure. You kind of alluded to it earlier. In the 60s, they shared the stadium with the Washington Senators, the baseball team, which wasn't very good. And in 1969, I think, an ABA team came here that lasted one season. And so when the Senators left in 71, 72, they were the only game in town, the only pro game in town. And so the identity of the city, I think, really became wrapped around them. And then there were a few things that happened. In the late 60s, Vince Lombardi was lured here to be the coach. And everybody just thought that, oh my goodness, Vince Lombardi, the greatest coach in the history of the NFL, all he did with the Packers, he's going to turn the team around. And he did in 1 year. He made them significantly better. And then in the off season of the next year, I think he had a heart attack and died. And so a guy named, I want to say Bill Austin, took over, and he was not very good. Then a few years later, they hired George Allen from the great Los Angeles Rams. And he came in with a lot of bravado. And not only did he come in with a lot of bravado, but he brought a lot of his players with him. And George Allen got the team very good very quickly, basically in about 2 seasons. And that's when that 72 game came up, and they get to the Super Bowl. So that really galvanized the whole city. Shortly thereafter, the Washington Capitals came here, and they were playing out in PG County and Landover, and it took forever for this city to embrace professional hockey. The Bullets came here shortly thereafter, and they came in and they got very good very quickly. They were in back-to-back NBA Finals, winning one in 78 and 79. But this became a professional football town. And of course, during the 80s, with Theismann and Art Monk and Joe Gibbs, Bobby Beathard, who was the GM at the time, turned them into a perennial Super Bowl team, contending team.
And they had these huge offensive linemen, or huge for the time.
Hogs.
Right, the Hogs. And they became sort of civic heroes, and it was very uncommon that offensive linemen would be stars.
Sure.
But they also had a kind of like blue-collar vibe about them, and they would pose for these pictures like in tuxedos because, like, isn't that the funniest thing in the world? That
right.
A football player would be wearing a tuxedo. And it really sort of branded the team in a way that was quite different than the traditional sort of stereotyped images of Washington.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Not only that, it generated a great deal of fanaticism in the fans. There was a whole group, the Hogs, of these guys that, and I don't forget where they worked, but I think they were representative of Washington, probably working in government. And they would come dressed out in these outlandish outfits. They sat close to the field and they wore foam hog noses and women's dresses, and just, they became a toast of the town. And you're right. I don't know that before the Hogs came along, Joe Jacoby and Russ Grimm and Mark May and all those guys, before they came along, I don't think offensive lines were so celebrated in football at all. They were rock stars around here. And they became huge stars within the NFL. And rightfully so, because they were so good at their jobs. And then John Riggins came here, of course, and ran behind them, and he got nicknamed the Diesel. And, he was famous before he got here for wearing a mohawk when he was with the Jets, and he had a lot of personality, and he was outrageously good. And Joe Theismann was, you couldn't tell Joe Theismann that there was something he could not do. And so he was really good. And I mean, it was an extremely well put together team, and they continued to drill the Cowboys. And so they met the Cowboys again in the early 1990s for the NFC Championship game, and it was almost like a repeat of 1972.
My favorite data point about that era was the year they first won the Super Bowl, they had a parade afterwards. And Reagan, who at the time was this fearsome, he was going to fire people from the federal government. It was a little bit like right now, right? And the feds really looked at him with a lot of trepidation. He gave the entire federal workforce in D.C. a couple hours off to go to this parade, which sort of speaks to how popular they were with the city.
I'd like to welcome the winners of the 22nd Super Bowl. The Washington Redskins and your coach, Joe Gibbs. Welcome to the White House.
Thank you.
Fellas, what else is there to say but hail to the Redskins?
This is still a professional football town. Although I would say basketball clearly is the most popular sport in the city growing up, playing it, and then with Georgetown. But yeah, that whole period from the magic that people thought was being brought here by Vince Lombardi, from then on, it has just come to define the city.
So you wrote a column, which I liked a lot, about having hope for the team again. And, on CityCast and lots of other places, we've all rehashed these 30-odd years of misery. But explain to me that feeling. Like, when did it go away and what has brought it back?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, if you talk to anybody I grew up with, or certainly anybody in my family, and told them that I was no longer a fan of the team, they would be in complete 100% disbelief. I bled burgundy and gold. I lived with everything that they did. I remember I think it was 1989, and I'm living in Dallas, writing for the Dallas Morning News, and I call up my fiance very excitedly one evening, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she said, "Nothing." I said, "We're going out to dinner to celebrate." And she's like, what are we going to celebrate? I said, "Washington just acquired Gerald Riggs in a trade, and that's all they needed in order to get to the Super Bowl." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" So sure enough, we went out and celebrated the acquisition of Gerald Riggs from the Atlanta Falcons. It's just part of my bloodstream. The Snyder errors just teased you in the beginning because he was from here, and he claimed to have been a big fan, and he claimed to have gone to games with his father, and yada, yada, yada. But you could tell that his fanaticism wasn't quite like everybody else's. And then he went out and made these splash signings of players who were probably washed up but were big names. It was a gradual thing. But I do remember the Sean Taylor game. And that's the one where he saves the team, it goes to overtime, and they score and come back and beat the Cowboys. And oddly enough, it was right around then when I think I'd had enough of Snyder. And it wasn't that game, and it certainly wasn't Sean Taylor. But the record and the way that they were playing and the firing of the coaches and everything just seemed to be going downhill. And at some point, my parents had become elderly, and even though they had a handicapped parking space, which would get them close to FedEx, when I would go to them with games, they didn't enjoy it the same. They didn't know the people around them. The fan experience at FedEx just got worse and worse and worse. Getting in and out of the stadium was horrible. Mm-hmm. Taking Metro there was not much better because the walk was like a mile. Not that it bothered me or my friends, but you could see there were older people, and that was not a cool thing. And then they had the bus situation where they were gouging people to take a bus to the stadium. Everything was falling apart. And then when the lawsuits, the Native American complaints were coming up, and there just seemed to be, Snyder was completely tone deaf to that. And there were just a lot of other things. And my fanaticism was sucked out. By the time I moved back to DC in 08, 09, something like that, I really didn't feel it. And I started to enjoy the baseball team more. And I started to,
So what brought you back?
What brought me back is the new ownership. Finally getting rid of Snyder. I mean, Snyder was, I don't know if you can actually explain how bad he was. You are hard-pressed to walk around this town and bump into somebody who's had dealings with Dan Snyder, and they say he's a great guy.
Yeah, it was a rare unifying thing in D.C. Everyone disliked him equally.
I mean, the one good thing he did with the team was how he reacted in the immediate wake of Sean Taylor's murder. And that was it, right? And then he completely botched it with the mannequin that they installed at FedEx Field as some sort of memorial to Sean Taylor. So every step he took was horrible. The misogyny that he exercised with the women who worked for the team, particularly the cheerleaders, it was just an incredible stain on what was a gold-plated franchise. You absorb this thing and you adopt this thing, and And just to mar it like you did is just incredible. So I remember going to 2 games as a fan with a friend of mine, and at each of those games, a fight broke out, which I had no recollection of seeing at the old stadium. And so then I was just out. I was like, it's a bad ownership. It's a bad team. It's a horrible fan experience. So why would I waste my time doing this?
So speaking of stadiums, they got good last year, really good. They have an exciting and attractive, appealing group of players. But this is not without costs, because the ownership, which really wants a stadium and really needs public help building it, they're both sort of drenching themselves in like nostalgic colors aimed at people like you and me. And the fact that the team is good and that the owner is sort of a good guy, a local guy himself by upbringing. Does the stadium figure into your renewed sense of hope?
Not necessarily. It's what the team is and how it's being run and the talent that is being developed that interests me the most. I went to 3 games last year as a fan, which is as many games as I went to as a fan the previous 10 years. So I was drawn. The magic of Jaden Daniels, the winning attitude, the way they play, the coaching, which seems solid, how they're drafting and how they're acquiring free agents. The fact that they have made this, they're trying their best to make this a destination for the best free agents in the league to want to come here and play. They had to fumigate that entire place. And I really appreciate how they've gone about it, really taking into account what players want to know. So I don't need the stadium back in the confines of Washington, D.C. And most people who are clamoring for it, that's almost 30 years ago. They probably don't know and probably never experienced what RFK Stadium was like unless they went to see a soccer game, right? See the DC United before they moved to Audi Field.
Yeah, the new thing looks so nice. It seems wrong. It's supposed to be rough in there.
It's almost futuristic. If I lived in the city, I would say, what's the best thing that can be done with that property? What is it, 170 acres, something like that? The city is in need of 36,000 new residential units. They need 10, 12, 15,000 residential units that are affordable housing. That's what the city needs. It doesn't need a football stadium. Now, if they put the football stadium in and it's domed, which is what it's supposed to be right now, which costs a whole lot of money. I used to cover economics before I covered sports. And you would be hard-pressed to find 2 economists who will agree on any one thing, except for the fact that they will tell you that spending public money on private sports stadia is not a good idea. If I lived in the city, I would not be clamoring for a new stadium. I'd be clamoring for affordable housing and that sort of thing.
So listen, I got one last question, and it's less economics than kind of psychology, which is, let's say your dreams come true. The team gets really good. They thrash Dallas and go to the Super Bowl. Is it even possible in the 21st century to recapture the hold of a football team over a city, particularly a city like Washington that is so transient? I wasn't like you. I wasn't a multi-generation Washingtonian. My dad was a New Yorker, but he opted to be a Washington fan because that's who you could see on TV and that's who you'd read about in the paper. And nowadays, you can get the Sunday ticket. You never have to give up being a fan of San Diego or Seattle or wherever you're from. Would a good Commanders be the kind of thing where the whole federal workforce wanted to leave to go to the parade?
Yeah, what's left of it, sadly. I think people still like an identity. I still think people like to say, my team's better than your team, which then translate to my city's better than your city. It does become identity. When I graduated high school and went away to school in Chicago, college in Chicago, I brought that with me. That was part of my identity. So I think that can be regenerated. And I would certainly say that after last year, just the feeling that the team provided from their big wins, getting into the playoffs, the way that they won in such an exciting manner, having charismatic players like Jaden Daniels, I think it'll be different. And the fans, I would say, that I've witnessed in the stadium now as compared to those that I grew up with, it's a different sort of exercise that they go through. But the demons of Dan Snyder have been exorcised from this franchise and have been exorcised, I think, from the fans who have been waiting for something to embrace. Washington, D.C., despite transient atmosphere that it always gets labeled with having, is a really good sports town. You know, Capitals fans are as fanatic as any fan base in the country. Nationals fans, where I have season tickets now, the couple of seasons leading up to the World Series year, really enthusiastic. You know, if the Wizards can get some magic back, I think they'll be fine. It's a really good sports town, and I'm sure that it can be regenerated. What once was, it'll be different, but the sort of enthusiasm and the sort of pride that people had in the old team, I certainly think that can happen again.
Hey, Kevin, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'll talk to you soon.
Go Commanders.
Indeed. Hey, before we go, I want to give a big thank you to our newest CityCast DC neighbor, Ebony V. Thank you for joining. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast neighbor. Just visit membership.citycast.fm. And we will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.